Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast, friends. It's Kim Skorupski sitting here in University of Texas Medical Branch, the small but mighty and marvelous island of Galveston, home of such wonderful things like the Galveston Symphony Orchestra, the Grand Theater, Bishop's Palace, Moody Mansion, the fabulous Gulf. It's wonderful to be here, and it's also wonderful to be looking at a new colleague and friend, Dr. John Heymann. Hi, John.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, Dr. Heymann is MD. He is an associate professor in radiology. He's a neuroradiologist and knows my good buddy Dave Usum from Hopkins. And those of you who've been listening to the podcast have heard Dave Usum on this channel quite a few times. Dr. Heymann, in addition to being an associate professor, is the director of residency programs. And for more than a year now, he has been the vice chair of clinical operations. So again, Dr. Heymann, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We are going to have a juicy conversation. And the topic that you and I both are very passionate about is compassion and understanding. So what in the world, why does Dr. John Heymann, neuroradiologist, care about compassion and understanding? Take it away.
Well, it's a great question. And it's one that I've told people I was going on this podcast and to talk about this, and they kind of laughed because a lot of people will say, my personality is somewhat bombastic. So I recognize in myself that I need more compassion. It came to me actually a number of years ago. I was asked by my chairman to attend the commencement ceremony for medical students here. And I hadn't been since I walked many years ago. And I went and I listened to the whole thing, and I listened to the Hippocratic Oath, or the version of the Hippocratic Oath that said, and I was trying to find a transcript of it, to be honest with you, because I wanted to remember the exact wording. But what stuck out with me is in that oath that we take as medical students, it's in there to have compassion for your fellow doctors, which is really what I want to talk about. And when I say compassion, what I really mean is understanding. Because I think that understanding is at the core of compassion. It's necessary for compassion, and how we interact with each other, and how we all have our own challenges. And so to be understanding of the other guy's challenges, because depending on where you are, I mean, it'll help you as a leader. It'll help with conflict resolution. It also helps with your own well-being, because just being mad at somebody or, being angry all the time is not conducive to longevity, and I think a lot of that comes from a misunderstanding of other people and other people's mind state. So it's very important to be mindful yourself and to practice that.
Well, Dr. Hyman, I appreciate this topic. And of course, it's really important to me being in faculty development and being a coach and just, being at this season of my life where I absolutely resonate with what you're saying, that the perception that some people may have of you is that you're bombastic. I too tend to be pretty outspoken and kind of hard driving and a high T thinking person on the Myers-Briggs, and have to work really hard to get my feeling side up. And so I'm kind of action oriented, and I get that. And I'm curious how you said a couple years ago it arrived, to you that compassion was important. And so can you take us back to there? When did something happen? What was, without too many horrible details, if it is in fact horrible, what made you go, oh geez, maybe I need to look up a word compassion? Or someone said I'm not compassionate. Geez, is that true? Because when I've done 360s on me and I got the report back, I'm like, oh man, I am kind of aggressive and I'm kind of a steamroller. I don't want to be that person, but yeah, my sisters and my family would say that's true. That's Kim. So how did you come to it, John?
Well, that is a great question. And I think there are probably several things that happened at once, or that happened maybe not at once, but in sort of a short period of time. In 2018, I became a father, and man, dealing with adults is difficult, but dealing with children, young children, is just incredibly difficult. And there was a book that I read by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. It's a famous book. I'm not sure if you're aware of it,
Yep.
but it's, he was a lead hostage negotiator for the FBI turned, business, consultant and stuff like that. And he has all these points in his book about negotiations and stuff like that. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was, he talked about managing your mind state. And because his book is kind of about like, honestly manipulating people to get them to do what you want. That's the essence of his strategy of negotiation. But he said, if you can't control your own mental state, how can you possibly hope to affect somebody else's? And there's just no better place to practice that than with young kids because they're just id, like 100%, and they don't care and they're just unapologetic about it. And, getting worked up, like I would get worked up at my kids and be angry and be like, why are you being angry? And having to understand. And I don't think that I'm not saying I'm a bad parent, like that's everybody's experience. Anybody who's a parent nodding, like I gained a lot of compassion. For example, I saw some lady yelling at her kid in the parking lot the other day. And I didn't have my kids with me. And she kind of looked at me and she looked embarrassed. And I just said, I got two kids. I get it. I understand, until you walk that, it's difficult to have that understanding. And,
Yeah.
that's forced compassion because of a shared experience. But in medicine, a lot of times you have to voluntarily find the understanding because you're not forced to do what the other guy's saying. So that was one thing. And then, of course, I became the program director in 2020 during COVID. And then I became the vice chair. And like at each of these stages of my journey, I took on new responsibilities to people. That's the big thing. Leadership, you're managing people and you have a responsibility to them and you want to do what's right by them. And so to do that, it's imperative that you understand where people are coming from. I think, most people's frustration comes from feeling like they're misunderstood. And, going back to kids, I don't have teenagers yet, but it's like you wouldn't get it, you wouldn't understand. We never really grow out of that sense of teenage angst. And I feel it. The other thing, becoming a vice chair is the frustrations that I have as a radiologist. Like, let me ask you this. You've done over 300 podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had a radiologist on? Well, you said David Newsom, so
Dave
you've had a
Yusuf.
couple.
Yeah. I've got a
Yeah.
couple. Yes.
We are somewhat misunderstood because the work we do is just fundamentally different than a lot of other types of work in the hospital. And radiology is critically important. Like things don't function without radiology. So a lot of people have a lot of demands on us, but they don't really understand the challenges of radiology. Everybody just wants results. So that leads to conflict and managing that conflict. There's a quote I really like. It's by George Eliot. And she said, the responsibility of tolerance lies with those who have the wider vision. And it's something that I always try to remind myself of if I'm getting frustrated, and sometimes it's game theory. Okay. Like view it like a game. Like I'll give you an example, just an abstract example. If I was going to have a meeting with somebody and right before the meeting started, somebody poked their head in and be like, hey, just heads up, this person's going to really try and get under your skin. They're going to try and rile you up. Don't let them. No way would I be riled up. I'd be like, oh, let them try. Like I'm going to be stone cold. I'll be cool as a cucumber. But if that person didn't say that and the person came in, I might get really riled up. And so the idea is that obviously nobody's ever going to poke their head in and warn you. So you need to always kind of have that mindset. And a lot of that comes from because people really aren't probably trying to rile you up on purpose. But if you don't understand where they're coming from, then it can happen.
Mm-hmm.
The idea anger is a secondary emotion and all that kind of stuff. Like where are people coming from? What's driving them so that you can understand them, even if you don't agree with them, at least aren't angry with them.
John, this is brilliant stuff, and I really appreciate your humility in taking us back to that situation of when all of a sudden, oh gosh, I'm a dad. And now you're virtually negotiating with hostages, and maybe the kid's the hostage, or maybe you're the hostage. But I really appreciate your honesty in taking us through the fact that all these different changes and seasons of life where we go through in our any career bring with it new opportunities for better insight into ourselves and a greater appreciation, as you pointed out so rightly, that leadership involves people, and that's relationships. When we teach leadership in the Office of Faculty Affairs here at UTMB, and back when I was at Hopkins at the Office of Faculty Development, we always acknowledge that it's about relationships, it's about people. So if we don't have an authentic interest in or curiosity about people, it's going to be really tough to be a leader because you are constantly faced with these tensions, these competing demands. And they oftentimes, when you said teenager, it reminded me of that. Teenagers saying, you don't understand me, mom, dad, you don't get it. Many of us in our own careers, like the bosses, they don't get it. They don't understand us. Those accountants, they don't understand us, or those, whatever, fill in the blank, they don't, nobody ever understands. So like you said, we never grow out of that. People don't understand us. So I'm this is wonderful. And you said something that made me think about, the great colleague or the wise friend peeking their head in and saying, hey, heads up, John, this one's coming at you. And that we don't have that kind of a coach constantly. So how does Dr. John Heymann poke his own head into his head before you answer that email, or before the pager goes off, or before your cell phone buzzes? And how do you give yourselves a heads up? How do you deal with the inevitable, what are y'all doing up there in radiology, just sitting around, watching Netflix, those kind of assumptions that people make about you and the pace of your work? How do you prepare yourself and gird your loins for the hits that you take all day long?
Oh, sure. Well, I would break it up into two kind of buckets. All right. There's the first bucket is easier. Okay. And the first bucket is something that I learned as a teenager, being in love. Right. And that's don't send an email in anger, right? Or a letter, like write it and wait, like sit on it. Okay. That's a lesson I think that we all learn very early on, in the context of what I would call conflict mediation, which is something that I do a lot, it turns out, really in both my role as program director and vice chair, is to not take anything for granted and not jump to conclusions. Like it's just a lot of this stuff is cliched, right? Like every story has two sides. So don't act on information just being presented you here. You can say, okay, I hear that, I understand that. I'm going to look into this. Let's put a pin in it. And, one of the things I like to do, again, because I'm talking about understanding, I am not a big fan of, I'm going to talk to this person, then I'm going to talk to this person, then I'll go back and talk to this person. I get everybody together. I talk to people separately, so I have a very good understanding of both people's points. And then I always put people in the same room and I say, or at least the same email chain, or whatever it is. But I don't ever want to be in a situation, or I don't like being in a situation where I'm having to be like, well, I think they would say this about it. I always want to be in the situation to be like, okay, well, they're saying that this is what happened. How do you respond to that? And just that direct personal, back and forth, I think solves a lot of things. But you do want to do your homework first, because I always, you can be surprised, and so I like to kind of have a pretty good idea what I'm going to say as the mediator and how it's going to go and how I'm going to, what I'm going to say about it. But as opposed to, and I'll give you an example, because again, I've been dealing with this recently, somebody saying, your faculty did this and it was unacceptable, or your resident said this to me and I can't believe it. For me to then go to the resident and make an accusation, or somebody else and be like, hey, I heard this, as opposed to approaching it from saying, what was your understanding of this situation? to take the accusation out of it and turn it into just information gathering. Hey, I'm getting information here. And then, to have the mediation or whatever to talk about it. So that's the easy one. Okay. The difficult one is the ambush, right? The in-person ambush where somebody comes and is angry, usually they're inflamed, or they say something that is a hot button issue for you, you already don't, agree with it. And they're quite honest with you, I'm not great at it, I mean, it's not that I'm like terrible at it, but I don't have a magic bullet. Like a lot of times you see yourself from the outside, or at least after the fact, you're just like, get it together, like bring it in, and you can emulate people. I have a friend, and I just try and channel him because he's an incredible debater and orator, and you think like, what is it about them that is so impressive to me? And I know what it is. It's that he doesn't get rattled. No matter the point, he doesn't. He remains. I don't want to say emotionless in like a bad way, but he doesn't let his emotions overtake him. And the way they say things like, okay, well, consider this. What about this? And you guide things with the question. But the key to it is just mindfulness, just being aware. And I'm going to borrow something. As a leader, I wouldn't say a self-described leader, but somebody who's in leadership roles. I have tried to do self-improvement. So I voluntarily took that crucial, what do they call it? Crucial communications course through the HR department, a year
Crucial
or two
conversations.
ago. Yeah, thank you. Crucial conversations. And they talk about that. They say you need to be aware of when a crucial conversation is happening. And you need to foster your own little voice poking your head in and be like, hey, this is a situation where, it could go south. So
you're right.
You got to stay ahead of it, because once you start going down, it's very difficult. You need time, to rebuild. You get kind of one shot at these situations sometimes, and if you blow it, then it's then it can be very difficult to pull yourself back out of it.
Yeah, I also appreciate your reflecting on the emotions and how you've got this friend and channeling maybe a friend. I've watched, of course, these different shows where you see attorneys are just so in a courtroom, are so good and I think practiced at dealing with facts and being able to be logical and rational. And that's so it's humbling to see people who do that well. And I agree with you. I often think of two people when I feel the visceral reaction of, man, did I just get criticized? Was that just a left-handed compliment? And I feel like someone just like throat punched me, the proverbial, throat or metaphorical throat punch. And you're human. The instinctive reaction is to be defensive, because when you talked about conversations, these different, I'm actually teaching in our upcoming early career boot camp that if you're interested in the boot camp, go to the facultyfactory.org podcast. We are doing it's an around the world, faculty members from around the world are coming to this National Faculty Leadership Collaborative. We're doing early career boot camp, and I'm co-teaching with Dr. Nutan Vaidya at Rosalind Franklin University. And she and I are actually doing a session on conflict and navigating difficult conversations. And you're right, John. There are these different types of conversations, or like they call it the I know conversation, and we assume things about people. The identity conversations that threaten people's identity. Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? And then the feeling types of conversations. So recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm in a conversation now that is all about identity, or it's about feeling, or it's the I know conversations. That what you're saying, recognizing and pausing, oh my gosh, I'm making assumptions about what's going on here. And this sounds familiar to me. This person maybe feels threatened that I am challenging their skills, their credibility, or challenging or threatening their feelings, or disputing their feelings, or blaming them. So that awareness about what we're doing and how we're reacting and where we are it's important for leaders that we need to have that responsibility, like the quote you get. It's on us to take that breath, to measure our tone, and if you can't, like you said, if you can't channel your buddy or your friend, listen, hey, let's revisit this. I think let's both think about this. Situation's hot right now. I hear you. Let me think about this, and I'll get back to you. And physically removing yourself from that exchange, I guess, if it in fact is an ambush.
Or I would even say, this too, because this getting into a point. As we go through our lives, we learn so many things. We pick up things from different people. I got this one from the prior section director of neuro, Karthik Raghuram. He's since gone into private practice in Nevada, but it was the year I started here in 2015, 2016. Okay. And we had recently gone from a department of like 4 neuroradiologists to 1. Okay. Ooh. So there was one neuroradiologist who was also the only, at the time, neurointerventionalist here, reading the studies for the entire institution. This is also before we had TRA. So it's an impossible situation. It's just not possible. That year he read 21,000 work reviews. Oh. Okay. Right. I don't know if you have a concept of that, but
no, I don't.
It's
a lot.
It's yeah. And yet he was being criticized by clinicians because if he had read all of them, it would have been 40,000, but it's just not possible. And so he's fielding these phone calls from these people that are yelling at him about like, why haven't you done that? Da, 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 da. And he just said, look, it's easy to be snippy over the phone or an email. Why don't you come down to the reading room and we'll talk about it? And it's not like a meet me outside, like not an aggressive thing, but like, let's talk about this face to face. And I think that, the rise of EMRs, this is very clear to anybody who's ever, like myself and probably a lot of people in my generation played video games online. People are nasty when they can hide behind a screen, even if you know the name, just like stuff in emails. So I think a lot of times actually being in person helps things. But it's so diffusing, like, again, because I've been on both sides of this. I have sent really catty or snippy emails to people about stuff. And sometimes when they respond, like as if they didn't even hear that part of it, they just didn't hear the emotion and just respond to the email and give me like a very, helpful or useful or just like informative email, it immediately disarms me. And I'm aware of it. I'm like, this is the adult. I was like, let me, and I'm sure we all play both roles from time to time. Talking about, again, my kids, my wife and I, we do good cop, bad cop. She's one of the most insightful people I know. And she'll tell me, she's like, hey, look, we can't both be bad cop. And a lot of times it happens organically, like we just play off each other. If she's frustrated, I'm like, I got to be the compassionate one today. Normally she's the compassionate one and I'm the more disciplinary one, but you wear the role that is requisite for that.
Well, could I just pause you there? You just said something to me that's so important. You wear the role, you wear the hat, if you will, that it's required at that moment. So that, again, everything seems to be coming back to that awareness and mindfulness that, oh my gosh, I just said something snarky. Oh my gosh, I just rolled my eyes. Oh geez, he just crossed his arms. Being aware and noticing things and being able to pivot. And then I also having the grace and the humility to say, hey, geez, thanks for that quick response. I appreciate your help with us. Sorry, I'm having a tough day. I know that sounded terse. No, I didn't mean anything by it, but thank you for your grace. I appreciate that. That also balancing and recognizing that we're human. We're all going to be, you're going to be hungry, you're going to be tired, you're going to be bombarded, and no one is expecting us to be perfect. And when we mess up, I think that's also so important to say, geez, thanks for that reminder. I needed to take a breath there. I am, it's been a tough one, but thank you for not responding in kind to my obvious snarkiness. You would
Thanks
have
for
been
not
well
escalating.
situated to do that, and you didn't. And I saw that, I heard that, and I appreciate that. So that's
Yeah,
also a
and to
humble
give that
leadership.
acknowledgement, because a lot of times the person does know,
They know. They know.
yeah, like, and you're just talking about people obviously are different. They have different upbringings, they have different temperaments. Like you said something earlier that made me think about myself. One of the things, uh, and again, I like to repeat this because it's just one of those things that I think is so true. And my wife is very insightful, and she said this about me once, that I don't like the idea of people. Like I'm generally a misanthrope, like large groups of people I don't like. Like I'll make sweeping statements about, oh, all everybody in the ED is da 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 da. But when it comes to individuals, there's nobody I don't like. Like you'd be like, oh yeah, you don't like any of these people, but like name one. Like, what about this one? Like, nah, he's all right. I like him. And so it's just like on a personal level, I get along with people, and it's one of the things that I actually, there are certain things that people like about themselves, right? The things that you value, like, oh, you've got great hair, you're smart, you can bench press 300 pounds, whatever it is. Like one of the things that I really like about myself is that I get along with a very, very, very broad range of people. I think I have a high tolerance for different personality types. And what I was going to say is a lot of that I attribute to growing up with my brother, who was very prickly. So, and what you said that I reminded me of myself is like about being insulted. I don't often realize if I'm being insulted because people cannot rise to the level of antagonism that
That
I
your brother.
experience as a sibling. So my skin is just so thick about certain things. People be like, are you gonna, can you, I can't believe you said that. I said, what? I said that. I was like, oh, I don't think he was trying to be nasty. And they're like, yeah, he definitely was. I said, really? I was like, oh, you have to do better than that. That's just like,
To up his game. Okay,
yeah,
so Dr.
I
John
feel
Hyman,
bad for him.
what I'm hearing from you is a testable hypothesis where you develop a program. It's like an intervention where we train people to get that thick skin, and we invite your brother to insult people for, like, say, a long weekend. And then we, bring somebody else's kids, or their own, probably their own kids would be better, to just like hammer them constantly. And yeah, do the whole hostage negotiation techniques with kids. That would really, people would come out of that retreat session with a lot thicker skin. And I think that's a great posture of like that.
You
Forget
have to
about
make them
it.
sign waivers going into it. This is like
Yeah.
the
The old Philip
experiments,
Zimbardo experiments of the
yeah, that you
prisoners and
couldn't
the
do
Stanley
anymore
Milgram
now. You're
shock.
talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the shocks, the electric shocks.
We'll try putting
Yeah.
that by IRB. Yeah, Dr.
I
Hyman.
was a psychology major actually, so
You get
I
it.
still have that book, 40 Studies That Changed Psychology, all the most
Yeah.
quintessential.
Well,
Um,
so this is great, John. What do we do about it? So it's one thing to have, I because we hear this a lot in this space, in faculty affairs, faculty development space for like, say, I don't know, 10 years now, around burnout and Tate Shanafelt and all these, famous people doing the work in burnout. And then some of the backlash it was on the faculty side is, don't you dare send me another email about doing yoga or doing the mindfulness app, implying that you need to fix me, that I wouldn't be burned out if I just learned how to manage myself better. I need to sleep better. I need to eat better. I need to do yoga. I need to be more mindful. Yes, true. And there are systems level things that are outside of our control. So a lot of the backlash and the burnout area was we can deal at the micro level or the meso or the macro level. So what can we, John, try to, how can we affect or state the case to our leadership at our institutions, how to encourage compassion or understanding, not being all woo-woo about it, but having a greater, it's easier to understand and have compassion if we are familiar with processes and systems and why things are done and how things are done. How can we communicate this gap in truly being able to understand each other or appreciate each other when so many of our systems are bogged down by inefficiencies? Does that make any sense?
It does, and it's a challenging question. But I'll say a couple things. One, obviously, within the last decade, there's been a huge increase in talking about burnout and stuff like that, and a sort of a light shined on it. But I remember from my childhood, somewhere, it could have been my young adulthood, I don't know, the phrase like drawn as a cartoon. So way before this became in vogue to talk about, the phrase, the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yeah, classic.
Which it's not a new idea. But I do think, so it gets to the idea of there is going to be conflict that happens. And again, like, let's be specific here at the departmental level, or, within individual departments within the health system, that arises independent of either group's ability to affect change in that, whatever it is that's challenging them. It's usually resources or time or something like that. And even if Group A and Group B understand each other and aren't angry at each other, you still have the problem. And so UTMB or any institution needs to have, I think, and let me take one step back here and say, everything that we're talking about right now, I feel like one could have the idea that it's always going down. Like, leadership needs to understand their direct reports. Like, I need to understand what you're saying, but it goes the other way. Okay. I am also well aware, although I'm always going to defend, my people, that when you look the other direction, the job that's being done at the top is also incredibly complex. Like, I'm saying, I'm the vice chair. I have to handle all these different disparate radiology sections, and I have to, I'm the program director. I have to manage all these different residents. Well, you look up, you say, okay, the president. Well, the president's managing all these different schools, all these different schools, exactly, and the provost or whoever. So, like, everybody's job is really difficult. It's not like anybody is just doing an easy job. And the higher up you go, the more difficult it is to have true understanding. Again, because of things like time. Understanding takes time. You have to meet with somebody.
That's
well,
just it, yeah.
If I've got 24 residents to meet with when I do semi-annual evaluations, it takes me a long time. Now imagine trying to meet with, and so there's always these, these tiers. You meet with your chairs, you meet with whoever it is, but it's increasingly difficult to understand people's true challenges on a granular level the higher up you go. And I think it's important for people at the lower levels to understand that difficulty going up. And everybody's had that experience. I'll just give you a quick experience. I was a debater in high school. Okay. And as a debater, I was like, these judges are such idiots. Like, why didn't he see my side? Like, clearly this is like, it's night and day. It's night and day. What a moron. I'm surprised he can even read. You just have these. And then, when I went to college, I became a judge. And then you're like, oh, obviously this person's going to see it this way, but it's challenging to adjudicate, to choose these things.
Yeah.
So
it's so easy to judge. It's so easy to judge based on these outward manifestations of what this role is. Oh, if I were a parent, I'd be much better than that. If I were the chair, I would be great at it. And until you're exactly right. That's the humility of when you get there and you go, oh, geez, I had no idea. It's this, that, and the other. That's right. And that's where I think your compassion, and in coaching, the coaching field, we talk about being curious and non-judgmental. So kind of quieting that monkey brain that always wants to go to, well, why is he doing that? Why did John say this? Why did he go there? That doesn't make sense. Dampening the judgment and instead flipping and say, I'm curious why John sent that email. I'm curious why John made that statement or that facial expression. I'm curious instead of jumping to conclusions or making assumptions. But you said something earlier, time. Yeah, when someone sends you a snarky email, what are you doing up there in radiology? Come on up and take a look. No one's going to do that. You know, everything, it does take time, and nobody has time. We're all in this cult of busy, and we love to compete with each other to see who's gotten, the least amount of sleep and the fewest bio breaks. So how do you mitigate the fact that we know what we all know what we should be doing? We all know that we should be pausing and taking a breath and investing in relationships and talking to ourselves and not making assumptions and slowing down. But how do you do it, John? In the real world, what
I
does
think
that look like?
yeah, the practical question becomes, how do you, again, at the institutional level, devote resources to addressing these questions? And like I've always approached things from a perspective of, uh, get the most bang for your buck. Take the lowest hanging fruit, not because it's the easiest, but because, investing this amount of time here, you get the biggest payout, right? Like, again, you see this in everything. Like my wife and I, like if we spend 2 hours each cleaning the house, I will spend 2 hours straightening the living room, like cleaning the kitchen, doing the dishes. I'll have a huge impact. She will spend 2 hours with a toothbrush doing like grout in the tile, in the shower. And like, again, you need both things, because without me, the house would always look really messy. Without her, the shower would never get cleaned, because I will never get to that level and be like, no, 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 no. There's bigger order stuff that we need to get to. I'm not going to waste time with shower grout tile. We got to do laundry. We got to do this and that. Soliciting feedback is important.
What I'm getting here is this real clear vision of how we're all so integrated. And when we, just by virtue of our jobs and the pressures we're under to generate RVUs and get publications and get grants and train learners and be on committees, all these pressures may force us to be in a bubble. They force us into this almost like a fake feeling of isolation, that I'm in this by myself.
Well, use the term that we're trying to tear down, pillars, because you're saying it exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. You need a ringmaster, somebody who all their job is to just understand.
To be like, as like a consultant, that they have no skin in the game.
That's exactly right.
They don't serve to they're not going to get a bonus or an award. Their job is to provide as much rich detail.
That's right.
And perspective.
I think that's of immense value, potentially, but it's not something that translates into work RVUs or productivity. It's not something that it would have to be, and I don't know, like, what do you pay that person? I mean, what do you do? How do you do that? It would be an experiment. So, are we out of our silos, or are we still kind of in our own lanes, just looking ahead and, doing our thing and interacting where we have to across the aisle, but not truly coming together as a team?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge in academic health systems around the country in North America. From interacting with my colleagues nationally, these stories, this sentiment is shared broadly. And so I'm really excited about the future of this industry and how technology and new generations and turnover and retirements, and new policies and new opportunities or different opportunities for funding, and how that's going to play out is going to bring change, that it's inevitable. And I think, it's incumbent upon us to, as you point out from the very beginning, practice compassion, not only with others, but with ourselves. Practice compassion and seek. I love it. You said seek to understand. We have to seek to understand. And again, back to my coaching mindset, being curious and non-judgmental, trying to withhold assumptions. Yeah, it's a heavy lift. It's complicated. And we can do it. It's not impossible. We can do it if we make the commitment to do the right thing. It's the right thing.
Yeah, it's a choice. There's a joke. I don't know if you ever saw Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. You know, it's like an
Of course, yeah, yeah.
So they said, before you criticize a man, walk a mile in his shoes, because that way, when you criticize him, you'll be a mile away, and you'll have his shoes. You know,
Forgot that the ending of it.
Right. So, you know, and to not have that mindset, which I think is what what a lot of people have. I mean, so much of this stuff is parodied in popular culture and has been for 20 years.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about it, but it hasn't changed. It's not new, and it probably won't be different 20 years from now. I mean,
why? Because we're people. We're people. It's just like look at any Dilbert cartoon or The Office. This is just the nature of human beings. And yeah, we are only, well, I was going to say, we are constrained by our humanity, but we are also unlimited in our potential as humans. So that's a paradox.
Yeah, and that's part of understanding. Understanding that. I'll tell you this. I'll end on this note. It's not a negative note, but it's an insight that I had. People tend to put other people in different positions on pedestals. Okay.
Of course.
But the more you get involved with something, the more you realize that everybody is just a person. I mean, there are different degrees of, Gaussian distributions of intelligence and capability and stuff like that. But one of the insights I had when I first started medical school, I remember I went back to where I had been college to visit my old roommate and stuff like that. And he was like, how's it going? Da, da, da. And I said, man, I tell you what, I said, one of the things that's really surprising to me is seeing what type of people are going to become doctors. In other words, saying some of these people like, really, and being in the medical profession, no matter where you are, from the level of like whatever, all the way up to the highest specialist. Within each of those pockets, no matter where you are, there's a distribution of talent, and everybody doing that is just a person, a fallible person, capable of making mistakes, capable of having bad days. It's all just run by
people. Fallible people. People.
So when you engage in any sort of a discussion, interaction, situation, just be aware of that, and try to understand what it is that is driving the other person. And it may not be rational, there may be some secondary thing. For my son, one of the most important things I remember, because mornings are tough, I'm like, oh, we went to bed late last night. That's what this is. And then it changes my ability to deal with that. I'm like, and it's usually my fault, right? Like, not only do I understand that he's tired, but I realize it's because I kept him up late reading a story or something like that when he should have been in bed. So I'm like, I need to be the one to tone this down, to be understanding. I can only make it worse. Again, I'm dealing with a child, like he will inflame, but adults are like that too. I mean, they can be. So
that's a really good reminder that we can always make the choice. We have choice as fundamental human right is to make choices. We can decide how to respond. And I would challenge all of us to practice fighting that urge to lash back and to punch back. Rather, surprise ourselves. Let's find some delight in our ability to take a punch with kindness and like the Buddhist return that back with or turning the other cheek in the Christian framework. But It's tough. It's tough. And this has been a wonderful conversation. John, I loved it. We'll have you come back and chat some more. Folks, if you've enjoyed this conversation with Dr. John Heymann, you can email him at jcheyman@utmb.edu or go to the facultyfactory.org website. You'll see the profile description of Dr. Heymann there. Send an email to me and you can contact us, and we'd love to have you in the podcast or someone you'd like to recommend or sponsor. So, John, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and hopefully see you for another go round.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Faculty Factory friends. It's Kim Skorupski here. Just a quick commercial for our upcoming Faculty Leadership Collaborative Mid-Career Boot Camp. We're hot off the 3-day Faculty Leadership Collaborative Early Career Boot Camp, where we had about 72 assistant professors from around the country and the world. Speakers included Drs. Susan Chubinskaya, Nutan Vaidya, Valerie Williams, Bob Tillman, Karma Fouché, Rachel Levine, Hannah Lundberg, Jennifer Haythornthwaite, Susan Matulevicius, Sonali Kandawal, and Kathleen Gamilla Crudo, Josh Polanski, and me. It was so awesome. Well, the 3-day mid-career boot camp for associate professors is April 9th to 11th, 2025, 2 to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, all via Zoom. The topics for the mid-career boot camp will include Leadership Presence and Self-Management by Joe Losey at Pitt, Communicating with Emotional Intelligence with Alice Fornari from Hofstra, Leading Organizational Change with Susan Chubinskaya right here at University of Texas Medical Branch, Conflict Management and Mediation with Dave Usum from Hopkins, Strategic Thinking, Planning, and Negotiating with Rejma Jagzi from Emory, Building and Managing Teams and Projects with Wendy Bennett from Hopkins and Darpan Patel from the University of Texas Medical Branch, Finances and Funds Flow with Vin Pellegrini from Dartmouth, and Creating a Leadership Future, Preparing for Transitions with Archana Chatterjee from Rosalind Franklin. We're also going to have a panel of recently promoted professors who will share their journeys. You'll get 9 contact hours of CME, CNE, and CLS continuing education credits. You've got a curated resource guide, lots of networking opportunities. We have a half hour before, half hour after each day's events for just more community building and networking and Q&A. So go to the facultyfactory.org website. That's facultyfactory.org website. You'll find the link right there on the first page to sign up and share it with your colleagues and friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Faculty Factory podcast. We are a faculty development community sharing tools to build academic leaders in healthcare. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast? Please visit facultyfactory.org/contact and send me a message there. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas.